The Galactic Council chamber stretched wider than the eye could see, filled with banners of alien empires glowing in shifting colors that represented their authority and pride. Massive crystalline walls reached high into the vaulted ceiling where light shimmered in patterns meant to inspire awe and remind all who entered that this was the heart of the civilized galaxy. Every seat was filled with representatives of species whose names carried weight across star maps and in the history of countless wars and alliances. Yet among them, a single figure sat unnoticed at the far end of the chamber, a human ambassador, wrapped in a simple black cloak with no guards and no ornate crest behind him. His presence was tolerated but unacknowledged, as though he were a mere shadow, given a seat out of pity or some forgotten promise written in a dusty treaty no one cared to honor anymore. The alien voices boomed through the hall, each delegate demanding resources for their fleets, demanding respect for their borders, or complaining of rival species exploiting trade routes. Arguments flared into shouts as translation devices struggled to keep pace with the dozens of tongues and dialects crashing into one another. In the chaos of it all, whenever the human rose to request the floor, no voice granted him the courtesy of silence. The council chair, a towering serpent-like being with scales that glittered like molten gold, waved him down each time with an indifferent flick, as if he were a child begging for the attention of adults. Whispers carried through the chamber whenever eyes drifted toward him. The Krath delegates with their 6 luminous eyes leaned toward one another, muttering that they had thought humanity gone ages ago, wiped out by their fragile bodies and reckless wars. A chittering envoy from the insectoid clans laughed with sharp mandibles clicking together, saying that humans were only ever myths, storytellers who claimed to endure on a savage planet none could survive. Others nodded with smug smiles, whispering that if Earth had ever truly existed, it was nothing more than a graveyard now lost under the dust of time. The ambassador kept his silence. He watched and listened, his expression calm though the weight of centuries pressed behind his eyes. His hands remained folded on the table before him, knuckles pale not from weakness, but from restraint. Every slight, every dismissive gesture, every laugh that rolled across the chamber like thunder was stored away. He did not bow his head, though others thought he should. He did not speak in anger, though others expected him to shout. He simply waited, his stillness unsettling to the few who dared to meet his gaze for more than a moment. The debates rolled on for hours, discussions of piracy near the fringe sectors, of famine on the agricultural worlds of the Telnari, of weapons, embargoes broken by smugglers who slipped through the cracks of the Council's watch. Species with armies greater than nations argued about honor, about rights, about who had suffered longest. Yet not a single word was offered to the human sitting in silence. His people were forgotten in their eyes, erased from relevance, reduced to a ghostly presence at the edge of power. And then a moment came when a minor delegate, curious rather than cruel, leaned forward and asked the council chair why a human sat among them at all. The question was followed by quiet laughter, as if it were a jest. The chair hissed a laugh of his own and said only that humans were harmless relics allowed to remain out of politeness, a reminder of the fragility of species that burned too brightly and too fast. His words rippled through the chamber and set more laughter rising. The ambassador finally allowed himself a slow breath as he stared across the council chamber. He had endured their ridicule, their ignorance, their dismissals, but his patience had its limits, and his silence was not endless. The council believed humanity weak, irrelevant, extinguished. They believed Earth itself was little more than a curse whispered by explorers who dared not go near it. Soon enough he would speak, and when he did, every voice in that chamber would remember the name of his world. For now he remained seated, his eyes fixed forward, waiting for the moment the council's arrogance would open a path for him to step through. The laughter continued, but beneath its echo the first sparks of unease had begun to stir among those who looked too closely at the ambassador's unshaken stance. They did not yet know what he carried with him, but soon they would. This was the beginning of the end of their ignorance and the first breath of a truth that could not be silenced much longer. The council chamber continued to rumble with arguments, as though the fate of the galaxy could be solved with more voices shouting over one another. The human ambassador sat still in his place, as if rooted to the very stone beneath his chair. Whenever he rose to speak, the council leader gestured him down again, reminding him that his kind no longer had any recognized power, and therefore no voice worth hearing. Some of the younger alien delegates snickered like children, while others ignored him altogether. The insult hung heavy in the air, but the ambassador remained calm. His silence was not surrender, but the drawing of a bowstring held taut, waiting for the moment to release. A new debate began concerning the safety of the outer colonies, where attacks from unknown raiders had grown more violent with each passing cycle. Species with vast fleets argued about who should send ships and who should pay for the war effort. Some said the raiders were a forgotten predator species, while others believed they were mercenary bands armed with stolen technology. Fear tinged the voices of even the most powerful empires, and still the humans sat in silence, watching their words circle around solutions that would fail before they were even tried. He had heard these same patterns before, not in council chambers, but in history books filled with the desperate diplomacy of dying nations. Finally, he rose again, and this time his voice carried across the hall, though the chair had not given him permission. He spoke with no shout and no demand, only with a steady tone that commanded attention even from those who despised him. He warned the council that the threat facing the colonies could not be met with indecision or with half measures. He spoke of predators that tested strength by pushing until weakness broke, and of wars that punished hesitation more than any blade or cannon. His words hung heavy for a brief moment, and some listened despite themselves, yet soon the chair's tail lashed against the floor, silencing him with a thundering crack. The serpent chair declared that humans were not welcome to speak of war or strategy, for their people had burned themselves out long ago. He called them reckless survivors of a cursed world who knew nothing of order or council law. Murmurs rose in agreement, and once again, the human was drowned beneath the laughter of beings who had never seen the soil of Earth or the storms that had shaped humanity into what it had become. Inside the ambassador, the weight of restraint pressed harder than ever before. He recalled the endless lessons drilled into him back on Earth before he had been chosen to stand here. Patience, discipline, the knowledge that timing mattered more than rage. He kept his posture firm, even as alien voices mocked him. They asked why a fragile mammal from a forgotten backwater thought he could lecture the greatest powers of the galaxy. They asked what humans could possibly know of predators when their species barely survived their own mistakes. The ambassador did not answer because he knew his words would be wasted for now. The time was not yet right, but it was drawing closer with each insult and each arrogant dismissal. When the session adjourned for rest, the ambassador walked alone through the grand halls of the council building. Aliens in resplendent robes swept past him without so much as a glance, their bodyguards sneering as if he were an insect beneath their boots. Yet a few of the younger aides watched him curiously with nervous eyes, whispering among themselves about the calm he carried. They wondered why he endured humiliation without flinching, why his gaze remained sharp even as he was treated like nothing. The ambassador returned to his quarters, a simple room far from the opulence enjoyed by other species. He stood at the window overlooking the lights of the city that sprawled around the council spire. He knew that beyond those stars, humanity was not dead. Fleets waited in silence, unseen and unacknowledged, carrying the legacy of Earth across the void. The council mocked him because they believed humans extinct or irrelevant, but ignorance was a shield that would not protect them much longer. As the next council session prepared to open, he tightened his cloak around his shoulders and reminded himself of the vow he carried. He had not come across the galaxy to be dismissed. He had come to remind them of a name they had chosen to forget. Soon they would hear that name spoken with the weight of history behind it, and their laughter would turn to silence. When the council gathered again the following day, the air in the chamber was thick with unease as reports had arrived from the distant rim colonies, describing entire settlements left in ruins by raiders who seemed to strike with impossible precision before vanishing into the void. Delegates who had spent the previous session mocking one another now whispered urgently, their voices heavy with fear. The serpent chair called the session to order and demanded proposals for how to respond, but even the proudest empires hesitated. They spoke of forming task forces, yet none volunteered to lead. They spoke of mobilizing fleets, yet each demanded the others pay the cost. The hall of power trembled with indecision, and amid this storm of voices the human ambassador rose once more. He asked for permission to speak, his voice clear and steady, but the chair scoffed loudly and declared that the council had no need for advice from relics. The laughter from the chamber returned, brittle and nervous this time, yet the ambassador did not sit. Instead, he stood firm and repeated his request. He warned them that hesitation was exactly what the raiders desired, that they would continue to test the edges of council space until they found the weakness that would let them strike deeper. Some of the delegates shifted uncomfortably, for his words rang with a truth they did not want to hear. Still, the chair silenced him, hissing that humans had no understanding of true war and should remain quiet before the council expelled them entirely. The ambassador's jaw tightened, though. His voice remained calm. He told them that humanity understood predators better than any species present, for his people had grown up surrounded by them, had been shaped by a world where the soil itself could kill, and where survival meant meeting every threat with cunning and strength. The chamber erupted in jeers and mocking questions, alien delegates demanding to know what kind of primitive beasts he spoke of, demanding to know why they should care about old tales from a world long forgotten. The ambassador did not answer with stories yet. Instead, he warned them that the raiders striking the colonies were not testing their fleets, but their courage, and that their refusal to act would invite disaster greater than any they had faced. The chair slammed his tail against the floor, the sound echoing like thunder, and declared that the council would not be lectured by a species that had failed to maintain its place among the stars. He accused humanity of being reckless destroyers who had burned themselves into myth. His words carried weight, and yet a sliver of doubt threaded the chamber, for some delegates had heard rumors of human ships sighted at the edge of known space. They remembered whispered stories of battles where desperate colonies claimed salvation had come from strange vessels, flying no recognized banner. The ambassador watched their shifting expressions and knew the moment he had waited for was coming. The council's arrogance was beginning to crack under the pressure of fear. Still, he held his silence, waiting for the right time to unleash the truth. His restraint frustrated his enemies, who wanted him to rage and humiliate himself, but instead, his composure made them uneasy. As the session drew on, the debates circled endlessly with no decision reached. A frail delegate from the Telnari agricultural worlds rose and asked directly if the human had any real plan, or if he only intended to frighten them with myths. The chamber turned to the ambassador with expectant eyes, some curious, some hostile, many doubtful. This was the opening he had waited for. He straightened his cloak and prepared to speak, not as a dismissed relic, but as a voice of warning forged in fire. He told them calmly that humanity knew war because it had been raised in it. He told them that Earth was a place where storms toppled empires, where predators stalked hunters, and where only those who adapted survived. He said that if the council wished to ignore him, then they were free to continue laughing. But if they wished to survive the coming storm, they would listen to what he had to say next. His words cut through the chamber, with an edge sharper than any blade, and left the delegates silent. For the first time since his arrival, the laughter faded. The serpent chair glared, but even he could not fully dismiss the weight of the words. The council leaned forward, caught between disbelief and a dawning sense of dread, and the ambassador prepared to begin the revelation that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The silence that followed his words stretched, long enough to make the chamber feel like a tomb. For the first time since the human ambassador had entered the council hall, no one dared to laugh, though many still wore smirks of doubt on their alien faces. The serpent chair leaned forward with his golden scales glinting beneath the light and demanded that if the human had such knowledge, then he should speak plainly and prove his claim. The ambassador's gaze moved across the vast room, slowly measuring every species present, their banners shining above them like crowns of pride. He allowed the weight of the moment to settle before his voice carried once again, calm and steady, yet edged with the quiet steel of a blade drawn in the dark. He began with Earth itself, describing a world that was no paradise but a crucible where survival had never been guaranteed. He spoke of storms that could flatten entire cities, oceans that raged with fury strong enough to devour fleets, and mountains that split open with fire to remind every living thing that the planet itself was alive and merciless. He told them of winters that froze blood in minutes, deserts where the air shimmered with heat until lungs collapsed, and jungles where each step could be the last as unseen predators hunted in silence. Some delegates sneered, calling him a poet of despair, but others shifted nervously because no world they knew matched such relentless hostility. The ambassador pressed on, recounting that humanity had not simply survived these trials, but had been shaped by them. He explained that the first humans had no weapons beyond sticks and stones, yet they faced beasts many times their size and learned to endure. He spoke of wolves with fangs longer than hands, of great cats that stalked in shadows, of creatures that struck from the sea with teeth sharp enough to shatter bone. Each encounter demanded more strength, more cunning, more cooperation. Those who could not adapt perished. Those who did became ancestors of a species that carried endurance in its blood. The hall grew quieter as he described humanity's rise from caves to cities, from villages to nations, each step built upon conflict and struggle. He did not glorify war, but he did not hide it either, for to be human meant to be forged by it. He reminded the council that while many species here had risen under the guidance of ancient patrons or peaceful alliances, humanity had clawed its way upward alone. When famine came, they endured. When disease struck, they adapted. When war broke out, they rebuilt, stronger than before. Earth was not kind, but it had given them gifts no gentle world could provide. Murmurs stirred among the delegates as memories of rumors returned to them. Some recalled tales told by explorers who swore they had glimpsed Earth and fled in fear of its savage landscapes. Others whispered of mercenaries who claimed to have fought alongside humans on forgotten battlefields, where defeat had seemed certain until humanity turned the tide. The ambassador did not pause to let their whispers grow. He pressed forward with a calm rhythm that gave each word the weight of truth. He told them that the raiders haunting the rim colonies were nothing compared to what humanity had faced on its home soil. Predators that hunted at night with intelligence and ferocity, climates that shifted from fire to ice in the span of months, diseases that spread unseen and tested every generation. These were the lessons humanity carried in its bones, and it was these lessons that gave them the strength to face any enemy, no matter how advanced or how fearsome. A delegate from the crystalline worlds finally stood trembling with a voice that rang like breaking glass. She demanded to know if humanity truly still existed beyond this lone ambassador, or if he was only a survivor speaking of a people long dead. The ambassador's eyes locked onto hers, and his reply carried no hesitation. Humanity not only lived, it thrived. Fleets moved through the stars under banners hidden for now. Armies trained in silence, and colonies flourished in places the council dared not look. He told them that Earth's children had never abandoned their birthright. They had only watched and waited until the moment came when their presence could no longer be denied. The serpent chair's scales shifted uneasily, though he tried to mask it with a sneer. He accused the human of weaving myths to frighten the council into granting him attention. Yet the chamber no longer roared with laughter. A heavy quiet had settled as each delegate weighed the possibility that the myths they had mocked were truth. The ambassador stood tall, his calm presence filling the void their silence created. He promised that soon they would see with their own eyes the strength of Earth, and when that day came, no council would laugh again. The chamber remained tense long after the ambassador's last words had faded. Many delegates tried to compose themselves, but unease rippled through their ranks. The serpent chair coiled in his seat as though ready to strike, yet his tail no longer slammed against the floor with certainty. He demanded proof, his voice sharp, accusing the human of crafting elaborate tales to frighten them. The ambassador did not raise his tone, nor did he appear shaken by the accusation. Instead, he began to recount not stories meant to entertain, but history carved into the bones of his people. He told them of the endless wars of Earth, wars not fought for glory, but for survival. He described the ages when tribes clashed with sharpened stone, when empires rose and fell under the weight of their ambition, when plagues swept across continents and humanity endured, despite losses that would have destroyed lesser species. He spoke of centuries where famine stalked entire nations, where cold winters took millions. Yet still humanity adapted and rebuilt stronger each time. The council listened with rapt attention, despite themselves, for there was no boast in his tone, only the steady truth of survival against all odds. The ambassador turned their focus to the predators of Earth, not only beasts of flesh, but the very world itself. He told of storms that could tear metal from foundations, of oceans that swallowed fleets, of skies that rained fire and thunder. He told of diseases that evolved faster than cures, forcing humanity to become cleverer and more resilient. He reminded them that many council species had been guided and sheltered by patrons during their early years, nurtured by allies or protected by stable worlds, while humanity had faced trial after trial with nothing but their own determination. Whispers moved through the chamber as the weight of his words began to settle. Some delegates recalled the rumors of Deathworld classifications, a scale used by explorers to rank the danger of uncharted planets. Many remembered that Earth had been labeled one of the most hostile worlds ever discovered. Until now, those tales had been dismissed as exaggerations or myths. Yet as the ambassador spoke with quiet certainty, the realization grew that these myths were built upon truths. He continued by describing how this crucible had forged not only resilience, but ingenuity. Humanity had learned to harness fire, to shape metal, to tame beasts, and eventually to master the skies and stars. He said that every obstacle had forced them to innovate, and every victory had been purchased with blood and sacrifice. Where other species fled from danger, humans studied. It adapted to it and turned it into strength. He reminded them that the very technologies the Council now depended on had often been pioneered by human minds before the galaxy turned its back on them. A delegate from the avian clans stood and demanded to know why, if humans were so powerful, their presence had vanished from the Council records for centuries. The ambassador met his gaze without flinching and answered simply that humanity had chosen silence, not extinction. He explained that his people had learned long ago the advantage of being underestimated. While the galaxy dismissed them as extinct or irrelevant, they had rebuilt, explored, and prepared. Their fleets had sailed through sectors beyond the Council's reach. Their colonies thrived in places where no other species dared to settle, and their warriors had fought battles no records preserved. Humanity had allowed itself to be forgotten because sometimes a shadow was more powerful than a crown. The hall grew colder as his words settled into the hearts of those who listened. The serpent chair shifted uneasily, as if realizing control of the chamber was slipping from his grasp. He tried to interject, but the ambassadors of several other species raised their voices in protest. They demanded that the human continue, that he reveal more of what his people had endured and what they had become. The serpent chair hissed, but could not silence the growing tide of curiosity and fear. The human ambassador spoke once more of Earth, not with the voice of myth, but with the voice of memory. He described jungles alive with venom, deserts that burned flesh, mountains that stretched so high even air itself abandoned them. He described animals with strength to crush bones, insects with poisons that could kill in moments, and storms that reshaped entire landscapes overnight. He explained that on Earth every day was a battle, and that this battle had crafted humanity into survivors beyond compare. As the chamber absorbed his words, the mood shifted. No longer did they see a lone figure in a simple cloak dismissed as a relic. They began to see a representative of something vast and terrible, a species that had endured a trial greater than anything the Council could imagine. Fear mingled with awe in their eyes. They began to realize why the ambassador's silence had never broken under their laughter, why his gaze had carried such unshaken weight. This was no broken remnant of a forgotten people. This was the voice of Earth itself. The chamber that once roared with jeers had fallen into a silence so complete that the hum of translation devices seemed deafening. Delegates who had mocked the ambassador now leaned forward with eyes unblinking, some in disbelief, others in dawning fear. The serpent chair struggled to maintain authority, his coils tightening as if to hold together the fraying fabric of his control. He hissed that the council should not be swayed by dramatic stories, but even his words sounded weaker than before. The human ambassador stood calmly in the center, cloak falling heavy around his shoulders. And when he spoke again, it was with the certainty of a man who carried generations behind him. He told the gathered powers that humanity's silence had been deliberate. While the galaxy forgot their existence, humanity had not forgotten the galaxy. They had watched quietly from the shadows, charting the movements of fleets, recording the habits of empires, studying the arrogance of those who thought themselves unchallenged. He said that the children of Earth had seeded colonies in systems, others abandoned as uninhabitable, worlds with frozen oceans, burning skies, crushing gravity. Where no other species could survive, humanity endured. He spoke of outposts thriving in the ruins of dead stars, of miners working under pressures that would shatter alien bones, of farmers growing food in soil poisoned by storms. Each fact rang heavy with the weight of truth, and the delegates shifted, uneasily in their seats. The ambassador reminded them that their fleets, mighty though they were, had grown complacent in times of peace. Their soldiers were bred in comfort, trained in arenas far from true danger, and their wars were waged at a distance through drones and proxies. He said humanity had never been granted that luxury. On Earth, war was not a choice, but a constant shadow. Every generation had faced it, from blades of iron to weapons that could tear continents apart. Humanity had grown strong not because it sought war, but because war never left them. And now, as the raiders pressed against the rim colonies, the council faced an enemy that demanded strength forged in fire. A delegate from the crystalline worlds rose again, her voice trembling as she asked what humanity wanted. Was the ambassador here to offer aid or to threaten the council into submission? The question rippled through the hall because many had begun to wonder the same. The ambassador's eyes moved across the chamber as he answered with the patience of a teacher correcting a student. Humanity did not beg for a place at the table, he said. Humanity had come to remind the council of the truth they had chosen to bury. Earth's children did not seek validation, they demanded respect, and those who denied it would soon learn that ignorance was the most dangerous enemy of all. The serpent chair tried once more to laugh, though the sound came brittle and thin. He accused the ambassador of bluffing, of painting humanity as a power it could never truly be. But even as he spoke, murmurs began to spread among the delegates. Reports that had once been dismissed as rumor resurfaced in their minds. A convoy, saved in the rim by mysterious ships. Raiders destroyed in ambushes by soldiers who bore no council insignia. Colonies whispering that allies without names had brought them supplies when all others abandoned them. These fragments began to weave into a tapestry that supported the ambassador's words, and suddenly the counselors found themselves unable to dismiss the possibility that humanity's shadow stretched farther than they imagined. The ambassador spoke again, his tone calm yet carrying the weight of command. He said humanity had no intention of hiding much longer. The fleets that had watched in silence would soon reveal themselves, and when they did, the galaxy would remember why Earth was called a death world. He said cooperation was possible, that alliances could be made, but only if the council abandoned their arrogance and acknowledged humanity as an equal. Otherwise, humanity would act without them, and the galaxy would be left behind. His words struck like thunder through the chamber, and for a long moment no one dared respond. One by one, delegates began to lower their heads or fold their wings or sheath their claws in gestures of uneasy respect. They were not yet allies, but fear had begun to shift into something else. The first flicker of recognition that the human standing before them represented more than a forgotten people. He represented a force that could not be dismissed. The serpent chair glared, but even he sensed the tide had turned. The chamber no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the voice of Earth. The ambassador let the silence linger, his eyes sweeping over every banner, every symbol of pride hanging above the delegates. He told them the time for laughter had ended, that they now stood on the edge of a new age. Humanity had returned, not as beggars nor as ghosts, but as survivors who had endured the harshest crucible in the galaxy. And with that endurance came strength. Strength that would no longer be hidden. The chamber trembled with tension, every delegate holding their breath as the human ambassador straightened his shoulders and stepped forward, the heavy cloak brushing the floor, a silent echo of centuries of survival and unbroken will. The lights above flickered as if sensing the gravity of the moment, and even the serpent chair seemed to shrink under the weight of the assembly's shifting attention. No one spoke, no one dared interrupt, because every being present now understood that the history of the galaxy was about to change. The ambassador's voice cut through the silence, steady and commanding, and he told them that humanity had observed, waited, and prepared while the council had indulged in arrogance and complacency. He said that the galaxy had underestimated the children of Earth, dismissing them as myth, legend, a forgotten species incapable of wielding influence. But the truth was undeniable. Humanity had grown stronger in the crucible of survival, and now they returned not to ask for favors but to demand recognition. The ambassador described the worlds humanity had claimed, planets others had abandoned, resources they had harnessed, fleets they had built in secret, and colonies thriving in environments so harsh that no other species could endure a single cycle. Each word hung heavy in the air, and murmurs swept through the delegates as realization spread like wildfire, the stories confirming what rumors had hinted at for years. The serpent chair hissed accusations of bluff and exaggeration, but the ambassador simply smiled, calm and unyielding, and continued to outline the consequences of underestimating Earth's children. He spoke of fleets capable of moving faster than the Council's fastest ships, of weapons designed to strike with precision on targets that had never been imagined, and of soldiers who had trained under conditions harsher than any Council army could comprehend. Humanity's strength was not in numbers alone but in adaptability, ingenuity, and an unbroken resolve forged across centuries of unrelenting hardship. The ambassador paused, allowing his words to sink in, and then he told the assembly that cooperation was possible but only if the council approached humanity with respect and acknowledgement of the balance that had shifted. There would be no compromise on arrogance or dismissal. Those who continued to mock or ignore humanity would discover too late that the species they had dismissed as myth was now the measure of power in the galaxy. He told them of battles waged to protect the rim colonies from raiders, of the mysterious interventions that had saved entire systems from annihilation, and of the intelligence network humanity had maintained in secrecy to understand every movement of potential threats. Every fact he presented was a hammer striking the walls of disbelief, and delegates who had scoffed moments ago now shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that Earth's children were no longer hidden behind the veil of legend, but standing tall in the center of history. The serpent chair lashed out with threats, claiming the council would act to maintain control and dismiss the human presence, but the ambassador responded without hesitation, stating that any aggression against humanity would be met with swift and decisive action, that the galaxy would witness a force unmatched in resilience and ingenuity, and that no council decree could erase the power humanity had earned through perseverance and sacrifice. The chamber remained tense, the delegates exchanging glances, some fearful, some awestruck, as the ambassador detailed a vision of alliances and collaboration that could be formed if pride was set aside. But he made clear that the alternative, ignorance of Earth's might, would be catastrophic for any who continued to belittle or ignore the species. Time seemed to stretch as the ambassador allowed his final words to resonate, emphasizing that the galaxy had reached a turning point, that the legend of humanity was now reality, and that the council would remember the consequences of underestimation forever. Slowly, cautiously, the delegates began to nod, to lower their heads, to shift into acknowledgement of the truth before them. The serpent chair coiled tightly, his pride wounded, his authority diminished, but even he could not deny the undeniable presence of humanity in the chamber, a force that demanded respect and recognition. The ambassador stood silent for a moment, the weight of generations reflected in his eyes, and then he stepped back, signaling the end of his address. The message was clear: the council's era of dismissal had ended, and a new chapter began, one where Earth's children no longer hid in shadows but stood in the light, unyielding, unstoppable, and commanding the attention of all who dared call themselves leaders in the galaxy. Humanity had returned not for mercy or praise, but for recognition of the strength that had been earned, a strength that would reshape alliances, redefine power, and ensure that the legend of Earth was no longer a story whispered in disbelief, but a reality acknowledged by all. The chamber remained still for a long moment, the weight of the speech pressing down, and then, as whispers spread into murmurs and murmurs into acknowledgments, the ambassador turned away, knowing that the galaxy would never forget this day. The day humanity stepped from myth into undeniable truth. The council could no longer ignore, could no longer dismiss. And for the first time in centuries, every delegate understood that Earth's children were a force to be reckoned with, and that the shadow of humanity would stretch across the stars, reshaping the future forever. The chamber had grown quiet, but the tension lingered like a storm cloud that refused to pass. The human ambassador moved to the center of the council floor, his presence commanding every eye, every mind the room felt, smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were bending to acknowledge the arrival of a species long underestimated. He raised his hand, and the murmurs died away. The air itself seemed to shift with anticipation. He began to speak again this time, not just to warn or to demand respect, but to reveal the truth of where humanity had come from. The stories of survival against impossible odds. The wars fought in silence, the worlds terraformed and civilizations built from scratch. While the galaxy slept, humanity had grown stronger, faster, smarter, more resilient than any could imagine. The delegates leaned forward, some in disbelief, some in awe, and some in fear. For the first time, the serpent chair seemed unsure of how to respond. The ambassador continued to speak of the fleets hidden in the outer systems, ships capable of traveling faster than any council vessel, weapons designed to incapacitate entire fleets without unnecessary destruction, soldiers trained in the harshest conditions, and strategists whose minds could predict moves before they happened. Every fact he revealed was a weight pressing down on the council, yet he offered a hand, a chance to cooperate, a vision of a galaxy where humanity could share knowledge and protection. But only if arrogance was set aside. The ambassador's eyes swept the room, seeing pride and fear tangled. In equal measure, he reminded them that the galaxy had always believed humans were weak, that they were a legend. But legends have power that cannot be ignored, and now humanity was no longer a tale whispered among star systems. It was a force shaping the present and future he spoke of. Diplomacy earned through strength of character and courage of action, of alliances forged in mutual respect, not fear or intimidation. He described how humans had saved countless civilizations from extinction without expecting reward, how they had learned the languages and customs of others, not to conquer, but to understand, how they had faced cosmic phenomena that others fled from and emerged victorious time and again. Every sentence from his lips left the council members with no room for denial. Their history, their assumptions, their judgments all crumbled under the weight of truth. He paused, allowing the silence to fill the room. It was not empty. It was heavy with the realization that the galaxy had misjudged the children of Earth for too long. The ambassador lowered his hand, his gaze unwavering. He knew he had changed the course of every mind. In the chamber, the council could no longer ignore the humans. The legends had walked into reality, and their shadow would stretch across every star system. They would be a force of reckoning, a symbol of resilience, a reminder that survival had forged strength. The chamber seemed to breathe collectively as whispers grew into acceptance. Some hesitant, others reverent, yet all acknowledging the undeniable presence of humanity. The ambassador turned and began to leave the council floor, his mission complete, his message delivered. The galaxy would never forget this day. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again, for they had arrived not to beg, not to bargain, but to claim recognition and command respect. Their history, their triumphs, their strength would echo through the cosmos, ensuring that the story of Earth and its children was written into the fabric of the universe forever. The end.